Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our weekly Parsha Shiur. We're not going to study anything directly related to the Parsha this week, but because we are just more than 3 days before the Yom Tov of Shavuos, we're going to study together a passage of Gemara as it relates to Moshe Rabbeinu receiving the Torah for the Jewish people. It's a famous story, although some of the details maybe are not as famous, and will derive inspiration and guidance from it for the upcoming Yom Tov of Shavuos. This particular passage in Talmud is found in Gemara Masechta Menachos, Daf Chav Tesam at base 29b, and the Talmud relates the following story. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, says the Gemara. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, B'shah she'olam Moshe lamora, when Moshe went up to the heavens to receive the Torah, he went up and he saw the Rabbeinu Shalom was sitting in front of an open Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah was complete. All the letters had been written. All that was lacking was the, quote, knots or lines or little crowns on top of the letters that Hashem was sitting there and filling in. Actually, this passage here in Masechta Menachos, the Talmud isn't really discussing much about Matan Torah or anything about that. The Talmud is actually discussing here the laws of writing a Sefer Torah, or writing tefillin and things of that nature. And the Talmud is discussing the laws of these lines that are put in on top of the letters. And so sort of in typical Talmudic style, almost like completely by the way, the Gemara slips in this story, that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to heaven to receive the Torah, it was time to bring the Torah down to the Jewish people, and the Rabbeinu Shalom was still putting the finishing touches on the Sefer Torah, putting the crowns on top of the letters, right? Maybe it's some kind of proof that Hashem is Chabad, because, he was late in concluding the writing of the Torah. I'm just kidding. Everybody relax. I'm just kidding. He saw that Hashem was sitting and tying and making these lines on top of the letters. Omar Lafonov, says the Gemara, Moshe says to Hashem, Rabbeinu Shalom, master of the world, Mima akav al yodcha, who is preventing you from giving the Torah as is? What kind of a boss do you have that's driving you crazy and insisting that you touch up and fix up perfectly all these little lines on top of the letters, right? Moshe says to Hashem, at least this is the simple understanding of the Gemara. Moshe says to Hashem, it's fine. We can all read the letters. We can read the words. It's fine. You don't have to worry about the little designs on top of the letters. What are they even for? Why are you fussing over this? It's okay. Omar Loi, the Rabbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Odom echad yesh. There is one individual, one man, who will live after many generations. Akiva ben Yosef Shmoi. His name is Akiva ben Yosef, referring, of course, to Rabbi Akiva. She'asid lidrosh al kol koitz v'koitz, for every one of these lines, for every one of these crowns on top of the letters, he's going to expound upon every one of these tilei tilin shel halachas, mountains upon mountains of halachas. I should point out, it is not known to us, at least not on a literal level, what the Talmud even means. We don't derive any halachas from any of the lines on top of the letters. None of these halachas are known to us. If the Gemara literally means that Rabbi Akiva would learn halachas, would learn laws from these lines on top of the letters, we are unaware as to what the Gemara is even referring to. But be it as it may, this is the literal meaning of what the Gemara says. Hashem says, I must fill in these lines on top of the letters, because in the future, Rabbi Akiva will expound mountains upon mountains of halachas from every koitz, from every line on top of the letters. Omar Lefanov, says Moshe Rabbeinu to Hashem, Rabbeinu Shalom har'ehu li. Please show him to me. I'd like to see a Torah teacher of this caliber. Hashem says to Moshe, turn around. So Moshe turns around and he finds himself in the back of Rabbi Akiva's classroom, behind 8 rows of students. Rabbi Akiva had a classroom with 8 rows of students. As the commentaries point out, your position, your seat, which row as a student of Rabbi Akiva you sat in was determined by your level of Torah study, how advanced you were, how far along you would come in your mastery of the knowledge and the understanding of Torah. This would determine how far you move in the benches, and as you progressed, you would get further and further closer to the front. Moshe Rabbeinu finds himself all the way in the back. B'soif Shemona Shuras, behind all the 8 lines, and has no idea, says the Gemara. He doesn't understand the nature of the lesson. Rabbi Akiva is teaching Torah, the Torah that he himself, Moshe Rabbeinu, brings down for the Jews from Har Sinai, and he doesn't understand what they're saying. Toshash koichoi, his strength left him. Moshe felt depleted by the fact that here he was, Moshe Rabbeinu, the one who had brought the Torah down for the Jews. And as he sat there, listening to them study and learn and teach the Torah that he gave the Jewish people, he didn't understand a word. But he stayed in class. Kivan shehigia ledavar echad, at some point, they come to a particular law, they come to a particular piece of the lecture. Omer lo talmida of Moshe hears the students of Rabbi Akiva say to him, Rebbe, they say, Rabbi Akiva, Rebbe, minayin lecha, what is the source of this particular law? Where do you get it from? Omar lohen, Rabbi Akiva says, I'll tell you the truth, there's no written source for it, but halacha leMoshe miSinai. We have a tradition that the source of this particular law, it was given by the Rebbeinu Shalom to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, and Moshe passed it down to his students and to his, all the way down to us. Nisyashvo daitoi. Moshe Rabbeinu felt better. Chazar Rabba lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he comes back to the Rebbeinu Shalom, comes back to the Master of the world. Omar Lafanav, and says, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the world, Yesh lecha adam kazeh, you have such an individual. You have a person like Rabbi Akiva, such a Torah teacher, such a scholar, such a force in human history, such a Godel beYisrael. V'ata noisen Torah al yodi, why in heaven's name, says Moshe to Hashem, would you give the Torah through me? Surely he, Rabbi Akiva, seems more worthy of being the one to give the Torah to the Jews. After all, says Moshe, I sat in his classroom as he taught the Torah, I didn't know what he was talking about. Omar Loi, Hashem tells Moshe, shtoik. Hashem tells Moshe, be quiet. Quote, Kach ola b'machshava lefonai, this is what has arisen in the thoughts before me, so to speak. This is what I have decided. End of discussion. Omar lefonav, Moshe has one more request. He says, Herisani Torasa, you showed me his Torah. You showed me his Torah teaching. You showed me his students. You showed him to me as a Rosh Hashiva. Hareini Schoroi, show me his reward. What awaits a man like Rabbi Akiva who teaches Torah like this? Omar Loi, once again, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Chazor la'acharecha, turn around. Chazor la'acharav, Moshe turns around. Ra, this time he sees Sheshoiklin b'soroi b'mekulin. He sees Rabbi Akiva has been murdered by the savage Romans. He sees they've ripped the flesh off his body and they're weighing it in the marketplace as they're selling it to celebrate the destruction, the anti-Semitism, the barbarian nature of their savage cruelty and their bloodthirsty ways. Moshe Rabbeinu sees all this. Omar Lafanav, he says to Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the world, Zu Torah v'zu schara. This is the Torah and this is its reward. This is how you reward a man like that. Omar Lo, Hashem tells Moshe, Shtoik, once again, be quiet. Kach ola b'machshava lefonai. So I have decided. End of story in the Talmud. Perhaps end of conversation, at least on this issue, between Hashem and Moshe. We don't know if there was any more conversation between the two of them about this. Hashem literally tells Moshe to be quiet, and that was the end of the conversation. Among the many things that need to be understood in this story, here are some of them. Number one, why is Moshe asking Hashem about why Hashem is filling in the lines on top of the letters? Surely if this is Hashem's Torah, then Hashem knows how to write it best. Surely if this is the Chachma of Hashem, then Moshe is no authority on how Hashem should write these letters and how Hashem should not. What does he want with this question, Rabbeinu Shalom? The very first question he asks Hashem, Mima'akav al yodcha, why are you filling in these lines? What do you mean, why are you filling in these lines? It's Hashem's Torah. Surely there's a reason. Everything else in Torah you do understand? Question number two, what in heaven's name does it mean that Moshe sat at the back of Rabbi Akiva's classroom, quote, he didn't know what they were talking about? Moshe didn't understand the Torah that Rabbi Akiva was teaching? How's that possible? How could Rabbi Akiva possibly be teaching Torah that Moshe didn't understand? Moshe is the one who brought the Torah down to the Jews. He taught them everything. Question number three, why does Moshe feel so much better when he hears the students ask Rabbi Akiva, what is the source of this halacha? And Rabbi Akiva says, we have a tradition. Moshe Rabbeinu heard it from Hashem on Har Sinai. Moshe feels so much better. What is this, an ego issue, Rahman al-Islan? Now all of a sudden Moshe feels relevant. He feels like he plays a role. What was bothering him beforehand? Was he bothered by the fact that he didn't understand the Torah that they were learning? Why does it make him feel better to know that these traditions are still alive? That they're still attributing and giving credit for these halachas? They're still saying halacha l'Moshe miSinai? And was this a halacha l'Moshe miSinai that they were discussing or not? If it was a halacha l'Moshe miSinai, why does the Gemara say Moshe didn't know what they were talking about? And if it isn't a halacha l'Moshe miSinai, why are they saying it is? Why does Hashem reject Moshe Rabbeinu's question? When Moshe asks, why is the Torah not being given through Rabbi Akiva? Seems like a legitimate question. Moshe is saying, wait a second. If he's better than me, if he's more of a scholar than me, and if he knows and understands all this stuff, why is the Torah not being given through him? Seems like a very legitimate question. Yet Hashem rejects it. Hashem just tells Moshe to be quiet. Accept it. This is the way it is. Silence, he tells him. This is what I've decided. What are we supposed to take from that? Moshe doesn't understand why he's the one who's being chosen to give the Torah to the Jews. This is not just an issue of blind humility. Moshe can clearly see that there are others more worthy than he is. Okay, so he's asking Hashem a fair question. Hashem, why don't you give the Torah through them? Hashem just shuts him down. Hashem says, no, be quiet. This is what I've decided. What does that mean? Hashem doesn't want Moshe to challenge him? Hashem doesn't want Moshe to challenge him about this? This seems like an ongoing theme in the relationship between Hashem and Moshe. Moshe is constantly challenging. And then, of course, the mother question of them all, Hashem shows Moshe the cruelty that Rabbi Akiva would face, the violence, Rahman al-Islan. And when Moshe protests, once again Hashem tells him to be quiet. All of this takes place when Moshe goes up to the mountain to receive the Torah from Hashem and give it to the Jews. What is the Gemara trying to tell us? And what does this all mean? To explain it, one more observation. The Talmud tells us that Rabbi Akiva sat with 8 rows of students. 8 rows. How big were these rows? I don't know, despite my name being Moshe. I wasn't there. I don't know how many students sat in these rows. Who were these students? When and where were these students that Rabbi Akiva is sitting in front of? So we know, of course, we're now still in the days of Sfiras Omer. Rabbi Akiva at one stage has actually up to 24,000 students. It seems clear that these 8 rows of students were among the 24,000. Again, I don't know if they were, how many rows of students are in these 8 rows. Are we talking hundreds of students in each row? Are we talking thousands of students in each row? I don't know the numbers. Was this perhaps one of the yeshivas of Rabbi Akiva? Maybe Rabbi Akiva had 24 different yeshivas with 1,000 students in each. Maybe each of the yeshivas had 8 rows. I don't know the exact layout of it. But it seems pretty clear that these 8 rows of students were among the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who perished, about whom the Gemara says they all passed and the world was left desolate. After 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva perished, the Gemara says Rabbi Akiva only managed to amass another 5 more students. That was it. 5 students is not enough to fill 8 rows. 5 students is barely enough to put around a single table. So obviously these 8 rows of students that the Gemara says Moshe Rabbeinu sat in the back of, these were students among the 24,000 students that perished, that died during the 33 days between Pesach and Shavuos, about whom the Gemara says after they perished, the world was desolate and empty. Meaning the world was desolate and empty of Torah students, because all the leading Torah students of the times were all students of Rabbi Akiva, and they all passed. And other than the 5 students that Rabbi Akiva was left with, that Rabbi Akiva managed to collect after the passing of his 24,000 students, we don't find any other students of Rabbi Akiva. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Gemara says, sits behind 8 rows of students, and he hears the way Rabbi Akiva is teaching, and the students are learning, and there's a tremendous kol Torah in the room, there's a tremendous excitement and passion, and everybody's learning. It's like a yeshiva where the word of Hashem and the word of Torah is alive and blazing. Moshe Rabbeinu sits at the back, says the Gemara, V'lo hoyo yodeya ma heino imrim. Moshe doesn't know what they're saying. The Torah of these students is not resonating with Moshe Rabbeinu. It doesn't mean anything. Toshash koichoi, and his strength leaves him. He looks around the room and he sees students, hundreds, perhaps, tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands. Everybody's in Yiddish, we say farkocht. You know what farkocht means? Everybody's passionate. They're debating, they're shouting, they're screaming. Rabbi Akiva himself is teaching Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu looks around from the back of the room. It means nothing to him. He doesn't recognize this at all. It doesn't even sound like Torah. He doesn't understand a word they're saying. Say the commentaries, you know what the problem was? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know what Parsha of the week it was. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know the halachas. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know what sugya they were learning. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know the questions and the answers. Moshe Rabbeinu knew everything. He taught the Torah to the Jewish people. It was all him. So what was the problem? Moshe Rabbeinu looks around and sees prophetically, correctly. Moshe can see through the facade. He looks around at all of these students with such great excitement and so much passion. And to him, it's so obvious. this has no future. Nothing of any of this will last. All of these students sitting here by the tens, by the hundreds, by the thousands, nothing will be left of them. Nothing will be left of their Torah. Nothing will be left of this Shiur. It's all going to disappear. And there'll be nothing left. Moshe Rabbeinu can see through some measure of prophecy and wisdom that while there's tremendous excitement with the students of Rabbi Akiva and the Torah learning, there's an ingredient which is missing. And this ingredient is so powerful, and this ingredient is so important, and this ingredient is so critical that without it, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't understand what you're saying. It's meaningless to me. This can't be Torah. The Torah of Hashem is eternal, and nothing will come of what you're studying today. To one degree or another, Moshe can tell that this is all hollow. And his strength leaves him because he begins to wonder what's going to be with the Jewish people. What's going to be with Torah? How can so many students make such a terrible mistake that will cost them their connection to the eternity of Torah? And nothing will be left of it. All his strength leaves him. He wonders to himself, how are we ever going to survive this? And then he hears one of the students ask Rabbi Akiva, Rebbe, what's the source of this particular halacha? And Rabbi Akiva says it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. That made Moshe Rabbeinu feel better and reassured him. Why? Why is that reassuring when he hears Rabbi Akiva say this is a halacha l'Moshe miSinai? Here is one of the insights, one of the many, many insights into this particular passage of Gemara. What does the Gemara want with this story? To tell us that twice Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Hashem to be quiet? To tell us that Moshe gets up there and doesn't understand what Hashem is doing, challenges Hashem, and Hashem's only answer is this is going to be useful for somebody in the future? Why is the Gemara telling us the story? And why is it such a critical story in the receiving of the Torah? Here's one of the many explanations and one of the many insights into this. You see, there's a difference between studying Torah and studying anything else. There's a difference between accumulating Torah wisdom, Torah knowledge. There's a difference between pursuing Torah academia. There's a difference between that. There should be a difference between that and studying everything and anything else. I'll tell you what the difference is. With any other knowledge, with any other wisdom, with any other information that you study, be it a legal wisdom, scientific wisdom, any other wisdom that Hashem has created in the world, the wisdom stands on its own merit. The scientific wisdom is either accurate or inaccurate. The medical wisdom is either helpful or not helpful. The research, the history, it stands on its own merit. It's either true or not true. It's either helpful or it's not helpful. You either understand it or you don't. If you do, if it's helpful, if you can master it, the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you delve deeper into something, the more knowledge you accumulate, the more you have, the more you can carry it with you, the more the information completes you, makes you a bigger, better, smarter person. The more knowledge you have. Torah is different. In what way? In that it is the wisdom of Hashem. And so the Torah wisdom, the Torah learning is there to connect us, to serve as a conduit, to connect us to a Rabbeinu Shalom that is always higher than understanding, always greater than understanding, always greater than as much as we can learn in the Torah. The purpose of it is always to connect us to a Ribbono Shel Olam that is infinitely beyond any human wisdom. And so the more Torah we learn and the more Torah we understand, the smaller we feel, the more humble we feel, the more we connect to a Ribbono Shel Olam who is infinitely beyond anything that any human mind can comprehend. The more we study Torah, when we study it correctly, the more humble we become. The more there is room in the Torah learning for something which is beyond our own understanding. The Medrash articulates this idea beautifully in the following way. The Medrash says there was a king who had a beautiful daughter. And it came time for his daughter to get married. And so the king went and he found a beautiful chassan for his beautiful daughter. And they got married. And on the night of the wedding, the king called over the young couple and said, listen to me, my dear daughter, my dear son-in-law, I can't possibly bear the thought of truly giving away my daughter. I can't possibly bear the thought of giving her away. I understand that she needs to get married. I understand that she needs to make a life of her own. I understand that she needs to go on and build her own life and her own home and her own empire. I understand, but I can't bear the thought of separating from her. Do me a favor, says the king. Whatever home you, my dear daughter, and you, my dear son-in-law, build for yourselves, whatever empire you create for yourselves, whatever you do, whatever you achieve, whatever you accomplish, wherever you go in the world, whenever you build a home, build one room in the home, says the king, for me, so that I know that I can stop by at any time and spend some time with you. Like a good in-law, I won't overstay my welcome, but I need to know that I'm welcome in your presence, in your home, wherever it is that you will go and whatever it is that you will do. Build me a room in your palace and I will come there and live with you, if I know I'm welcome. So says the Medrash, the Ribbono Shel Olam, Hashem gives away his daughter, he gives away the Torah, the source of all wisdom. He gives it to a young eligible bachelor, the Jewish people. And he tells them, please, by all means, get married. Study the Torah, master the Torah, live according to the Torah. Build your own home, build a Jewish nation around this Torah, but don't forget about me, says Hashem, the father of the bride. Build a room. Build a room where I will always be welcome. In studying the Torah, one can never forget that the purpose of the study of Torah is to become more godly, is to become more divine and more elevated, to develop a deeper connection with Hashem. Many pieces and sections of Torah don't speak openly about anything related to Hashem. Many large sections of Torah talk about laws, monetary laws that govern dealings between people. Laws of food, laws of eating, laws of drinking, laws of all sorts of things. One can get so involved in the details and the technicalities of the Torah. One can, God forbid, forget at times that it is the Torah of Hashem, and one needs to look for the godly element, the godly ingredient, the godly factor. In every piece of Torah that you learn, ask yourself, one needs to ask themselves, how is this going to make me a more godly Jew? The Gemara says something harrowing. The Gemara says two people study Torah. One person had the merit, the other loy zocha, the other did not merit. The one who merited, the one for who had the zechus zocha, nasa loy samachayim, the Torah for him was a medicine of life. Loy zocha, and may Hashem protect us, he who did not, merit. Nasa loy samamovas, the Torah for him became a poison of death. What does that mean? It means two people studied Torah. One studied it with the understanding that the Torah is supposed to change me, elevate me, make me more humble, bring me to a higher level of understanding to touch godliness as much as possible. The other studied Torah. The more they studied, the more full of themselves they became. The more, may Hashem protect us, arrogant and egotistical the person became, because he had amassed so much Torah learning that he was now such a great scholar, that he became full of himself instead of filled with Hashem. And so for him, the Torah filled him with ego. Lo zacha, he didn't merit. The Torah became for him, may Hashem protect us, some hamavis, a poison of death. Or in the words of the Medrash, if you study Torah, make sure that behind the Torah, there's always a chamber for Hashem's presence to be there. No matter which halacha you're learning, even if you're learning about oxen and donkeys, study it, live it, and then ask yourself, how does this make me more of a godly Jew? That's the difference between Torah and every other wisdom. Every other wisdom, the wisdom itself, makes you more knowledgeable, makes you bigger, makes you wiser, makes you greater. If it's good, if it's accurate wisdom, if it's helpful wisdom, you're a more knowledgeable person because you have it. With Torah, it doesn't work that way. You're not necessarily better off just because you've amassed more Torah learning. It matters more what you'll do, what type of impact, how you'll live a Torah life, what you'll do with this Torah learning, rather than how many pages of Gemara you've amassed. The Torah learning always needs to be accompanied with humility. Otherwise, God forbid, it can turn sour. There's a Hasidic legend that the Baal Shem Tov once saw a young scholar who was a brilliant man, and he was studying the Talmud, and he was known as having a very sharp mind, and he was achieving tremendous success academically. And the Baal Shem Tov saw this man walking down the street, and his hat was tilted to the side, which I guess was some kind of a fashion statement that one felt very proud of oneself. So the Baal Shem Tov stopped this individual and says to him, "Tell me, I can see you're wearing your hat to the side. You must be very happy or proud of something. What is it?" And the person said, "I've studied so many pages of Gemara, so many pages of commentary. I've amassed and accumulated so much Torah knowledge, and I've understood it so well. I'm so excited." And the Baal Shem Tov says to him, "Tell me, if it took you 100 pages of Gemara for your hat to go from year to year, how many more pages is it going to take until the hat falls off altogether?" Meaning to say, how long is it going to take till this goes to your head and fries your brain and your own ego, and you forget that this is supposed to be making you more of a godly Jew? Let's go back to the Gemara. Moshe Rabbeinu comes upstairs to receive the Torah from the Ribbono Shel Olam. And he sees the Ribbono Shel Olam is kosher kshorim la'osiyos. Hashem is putting little lines on top of the letters. What is the purpose of these lines on top of the letters? I mentioned before, we don't know today any halachas that are derived from the lines on top of the letters. But yet they're there in the Torah. And they're there, and the Gemara says there are halachas to be learned from them. So he looks at the Ribbono Shel Olam and says, "What is this for?" And Hashem says, "You don't know. Welcome to Torah." In order to study Torah, you always have to remember that there's a part to this which is beyond your understanding. On top of every letter, there's a crown. On top of so many letters, there's a line, and the line points up. And the line that points up says there's more to this than you'll ever know. The line points to the direction of the Ribbono Shel Olam, reminding us that this letter comes from Hashem. It's like a sign and an arrow. Moshe says, we don't know what this line does. It doesn't teach us anything. If you, Hashem, know things about the Torah, that you're not sharing with us, then what is the point of putting these lines on the letters if we're not going to understand their meaning? And Hashem says that is the point. The point is that when you study Torah, you always know and you always celebrate that there's a divine element in here, which is beyond understanding. That's the lesson. That's the lesson. The lesson is that you know that there's a part to it that you understand, and there's a part to it that you don't understand. And no matter how much you learn, it'll always stay that way. That's the purpose of the lines on top of the letters. And without those lines, the Sefer Torah could be possible. Without those lines, you may think you understand the whole thing. The lines come to tell you that there is more to it than you know. I read in one of the commentaries, it says, it's kind of like one of the reasons why we always wear a yarmulke. Why do we wear a yarmulke covering on top of our heads? It's a similar message. It's there to remind us that as great as we think we are, there's something above us. There's something out of reach, and it's there to keep us humble. And Hashem says to Moshe, Rabbi Akiva will be the one to teach the meaning of these lines. Rabbi Akiva is going to be the one whose life and his lessons, they're going to teach the meaning of these lines on top of the letters. For every line, he's going to deduce mountains and mountains of halachas. What does that mean? If you notice, the Gemara changes the wording. When it comes to what Rabbi Akiva would do, the Gemara says, Hashem tells Moshe, for She'os Rabbi Akiva, Osid Lidosh in the future is going to expound Al Kol Koitz V'Koitz. Koitz, actually the translation of the word koitz, is a thorn. Until now, they were called ksorim, they were called crowns on top of the letters. Now they're being called thorns. Rav Soloveitchik once said that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Akiva's life is going to be filled with thorns. He's going to be needled and poked and pierced by so many thorns. The loss of 24,000 students, separated from his own wife for 24 years. Eventually, Rahman al-Islam, his own barbaric death. But I'll call koitz v'koitz, and every one of these thorns, every time Rabbi Akiva was poked, every time he was prodded, he produced mountains upon mountains of halachas. For Rabbi Akiva lived a life and taught a Torah that was so godly, that was so transparently the wisdom of Hashem, that nothing could break him and nothing could destroy him. No matter what came his way, he drew his strength, he drew his inspiration from him being connected to the Ribbono Shel Olam. No matter what came his way, he was connected. He was able to overcome it. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, these lines on top of the letters, they are here to express the godly element of Torah. You know who's going to reveal this? You know who's going to reflect this like nobody else? Rabbi Akiva, that for every koitz v'koitz, as 24,000 of his students died, and as he himself is massacred, Torah will only become stronger. The Jewish nation will only become stronger through it. There will be more and more mountains of halachas and Torah study that will emerge from it. Rabbi Akiva will express the superhuman, godly element of Torah, the eternity of it, like nobody else. If Rabbi Akiva would have if we would have simply been a great professor, if he would have simply been a man filled with tremendous wisdom, if he would have just had a super mind, if that's all it was, he would have never been able to survive the passing of all of his students. He would have never been able to go through all he had gone through as a human being and still continue to teach Torah with humility. Rabbi Akiva was a Gadol Hadoir. He was there to reveal and to express the godly element of Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu says, this I got to see. And so Hashem puts him in the back of Rabbi Akiva's classroom and shows him, as I mentioned before, 24th, well, not 20, I don't know if all 24,000 were there that day, but shows him all these students who had perhaps missed this point. Shows him so many students studying Torah, all of whom tremendously passionate about the study of Torah, and yet they can't find it in their hearts to honor each other. The humility factor is lacking. And Moshe says, this is terrible. Nothing is going to come from this. Until he hears Rabbi Akiva himself say to the students, the eternal teacher still trying to teach them, he hears Rabbi Akiva tell the students, this is Aloha LaMoshe Misinai. Moshe, the most humble of all men, received this from the Rebbeinu Shloim on Har Sinai, the most humble of all mountains. Torah needs to be learned with humility. Moshe hears Rabbi Akiva teach that to his students. Moshe felt better. Why? Why did he feel better? Perhaps, may Hashem protect us in that particular case, the students were not open to it. Perhaps the students missed it. They couldn't absorb this part of the lesson for whatever reason. They were too busy with whatever it was that they had got wrapped up in, and they couldn't learn this lesson from Moshe Rabbeinu, from their teacher, Rabbi Akiva. They were too involved in their own understanding, in their own minds, to see, to touch that which is beyond intellect. They couldn't touch the halacha l'Moshe Misinai. But Moshe Rabbeinu heard it from Rabbi Akiva. Ah, says Moshe. In that case, we are safe and we are secure. Okay. For even if nothing, may Hashem protect us, even if nothing comes from any of these students, Rabbi Akiva will survive. And Rabbi Akiva will find more students to whom he will be able to teach this lesson, Halacha LaMoshe Misinai. Halacha means law, but halacha also means growth. Halacha means there is a future. Halacha means things will continue. As long as the Torah is imbued with the spirit of Moshe himself, the most humble of all men, who received it on Har Sinai, the lowest of all mountains. Halacha LaMoshe Misinai, Moshe feels better. But he's got one more question. Okay, Hashem. Let him give the Torah to the Jews. Let it be him. Let it be Rabbi Akiva, the one who can stand up there in front of his brightest of students and tell them to be humble. Let him be the one to give the Torah to the Jews. Why should it be me? And Hashem tells Moshe to be quiet. Hashem says, shh. Hashem says, this is what I have decided. And Moshe accepts. It was, of course, at this moment when Hashem tells Moshe, notwithstanding all of Moshe's questions and all of his challenges, which Hashem welcomes. And Hashem tells Moshe to be quiet, to be silent, and to accept the ruling of Hashem. It's, of course, at this moment that we discover the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu himself. And why, in truth, he really is the one who was the Makabel Torah Misinai, the one who receives the Torah and gives it to the Jews. Not necessarily because he was the greatest Rosh Yeshiva, although of course he was. Not because he was the greatest scholar of them all, although of course he was. Not because he was the greatest orator, which he wasn't. So what was the quality that made him Moshe Rabbeinu? Shtoik. It was that Hashem looked at him and said, Moshe, you are going to be quiet. You're going to accept that this is what I, Hashem, have decided, and I'm going to communicate it through you. In the Hasidic books, it says you can restructure the pronunciation of these words. Simply it reads, Hashem tells him, Shtoik, be quiet. Kach olo b'machshava lefonai. This is what I have decided. This is what has arisen in my thoughts. This is what I have decided. In the Hasidic works, it says, Hashem told him, Shtoik, be quiet. Kach, so, alei, you, Moshe, will arise b'machshava lefonai, in my Hashem's highest levels of thoughts. Hashem says to Moshe, when you'll be quiet, when you'll be humble, when you'll learn to make space in yourself for something which is higher than yourself. Kach alei b'machshava lefonai, so you, Moshe, will be elevated into my Hashem's highest of thoughts, and I will show you, I will elevate you to a level which is beyond human comprehension. And then you'll go and you'll receive the Torah, and you'll give it to the Jewish people. And so Moshe does. He's silent. He's elevated. He becomes the greatest Torah teacher, the transmitter of Torah from Hashem to the Jews. And for all eternity, Moshe teaches us this lesson. And the lesson is study Torah, treasure it. Study it every day, study it every night. A Jew is obligated to study Torah 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're allowed to take breaks to take care of our bodily needs, to take care of our family needs, to work in order to earn our parnasa, etc. We're allowed to take breaks for these things. But other than that, we're not allowed to waste 1 second of our lives. We have to spend the entire thing studying Torah. Wait, says Moshe, wait. Before you open a Gemara, before you open a Rambam, before you open a Chumash or a book of Torah, whatever it is, and immerse yourself into it, wait. Remember the introductory words. Remember the lines on top of the letters. Remember Hashem's words to me, Moshe Rabbeinu, shtoik. There will come a moment where you will come face to face with the reality that you don't understand. There will come a time in life where you'll have to open yourself up with tremendous humility and say, Ribono Shel Olam, I don't get it. And instead of thinking you're so smart and trying to figure out the answer, and instead of telling yourself perhaps the answer is on the next page of the Gemara, and if I can just get there, I can figure it out and solve all these world's problems. This may be your moment to build a chamber for the queen's father right next door and invite the king himself to come and live in your palace and say, Ribono Shel Olam, there's more to this than I'll ever understand. Connect me, Ribono Shel Olam, to you. My emunah is strong. My betochen is strong. I believe and trust in Hashem in ways that I don't understand. And remain connected to Hashem beyond my understanding. And so, my dear friends, the Gemara concludes, for this reason, Torah will remain with the Jewish people forever. For this reason, the Jews are eternity. For this reason, their Torah learning is eternal. For this reason, Jews will study it and practice it for all future times, and it shall never leave us. Why? Nothing human is eternal. Everything human is mortal, here today, gone tomorrow. We're so limited, we're so small, we're so puny. And yet we have the power to teach and to study and pass on to our children something absolutely eternal. Why? Because it's the Torah of Hashem, that's why. Because Hashem told Moshe, be quiet. This is what I have decided. Included in every word of Torah is something from Hashem, which requires us to stand there with our mouths open and say, as much as we understand nothing. As much as we know nothing. As smart as we think we are sometimes incredibly stupid compared to the Ribono Shel Olam's eternal wisdom. And as long as we hold on to that, we're connected to something that shall never fail. And even as Moshe stares down the barrel of Jewish history and sees Rahman al-Itzlan Rabbi Akiva butchered and murdered to death, or sees all of the different sorrows Rahman al-Itzlan that will befall Klal Yisrael, the message of Rabbi Akiva remains. Al kol koitz v'koitz. Every time the Jews are pressed and Rahman al-Islam beaten and hurt, for everything the Jewish people go through, emerge tilei tilim shel halachas, mountains upon mountains of halachas. For every one of those 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who perished, Rahman al-Islam. Today there are thousands of yeshiva students all over the world studying the words of Rabbi Akiva, studying the words of Rab Tarfon, studying the words of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Lo yomush sefer ha-Torah hazeh mipicha. The Torah never leaves the Jews. We celebrate Shavuos again and again, and we redouble and recommit ourselves to learning of it and practicing of it. And we always remember that the source of so many of these halachas, halacha l'Moshe miSinai, were received from Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. There's a great Hasidic story. I'll take 2 more minutes. There's a great Hasidic story. They said about a Hasidic Rebbe. His name was Reb Meir of Premishlan. And the story, very brief, there's Reb Meir of Premishlan would go to the mikveh. Every morning he would walk down the hill from his home to the mikveh. And when he was done, he would walk right back up the hill. And the hill was considered dangerous because when weather conditions got rough, there was snow and sleet and mud. And yet he was never perturbed. Down the hill, up the hill, down the hill, up the hill. His Hasidim said, Reb Meir is a miracle worker. He walks down the mountain, he walks up the mountain, he never falls, he never hurts himself. The detractors made fun of them. You fools, they said. What's the big deal? Down the mountain, up the mountain. What are you making a big tumult? What are you making a big tzimas out of nothing? His Hasidim said, you try it. So they tried it, and they fell, and they broke their legs. And they came to Reb Meir of Premishlan and they said, is it a miracle that you walk down the mountain and you walk up the mountain and you never fall? We tried it, we broke our legs. Is it a miracle? And Reb Meir of Premishlan said, of course it's not a miracle. So how do you do it, Rebbe? And he said to them in Yiddish, Am ist zugebunden oben, fällt man nicht unten. When you're connected above, you don't fall below. When you're connected to something higher, you never truly fall down. Yes, there are setbacks. Yes, you may stumble. Yes, you may encounter challenges, but if you're connected, if you're kosher ksorim la'oisiyos, if on top of every letter there is a knot that connects you to He, the Rabbeinu Shalom, who is higher than the letters who gave the Torah. If in every word there's a godly element, if the Rabbeinu Shalom lives in the same palace, if you remember that the Torah is halacha l'Moshe miSinai, then you can remember alei b'machshava lefanai, that we always remain connected to Hashem and His thoughts. The Rabbeinu Shalom and His Torah and His people are eternal. This is the meaning, the true meaning of learning and studying Torah, as we do every year, all over again, from the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Wishing you all a happy Shabbos and a very wonderful Yom Tov. May Hashem continue to protect all Yidden all around the world and bless them with health and prosperity and gesund and nachas and only the most wonderful blessings. Have a wonderful Shabbos and, of course, a wonderful Yom Tov.